I think in our lives, like that same logic can really be applied to like why we don't go to God first with so many things, right? Like we have, the all knowledge and wisdom and that available to us, right? Like literally, he is all knowing and all seeing and all powerful and he cares for us and all those things. But often we will go to our friends or our mentors or our, whomever. Google.
We have at 2 a.m. on Google.
Right. Or AI nowadays, right?
Self-diagnosing.
Like, we go to all those things before we go to the Lord.
Yeah.
Yo, welcome back to the Vibes Daily Podcast. It is day 262 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted as we journey through the entire Bible from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. You have joined us in a new book for us, in the book of Daniel, which we will start today. And I am back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, as we continue our journey through these prophets and get to our next one here in the book of Daniel. So yesterday, we finished off the book of Ezekiel, which we recall Ezekiel's message is during exile into Babylon. He probably was with the second group that was exiled to Babylon, but there was a group that was exiled just before him. And we find ourselves here in that time, kind of when we get introduced to Daniel. Now, we've heard Daniel's name already a couple times, kind of through scripture, and he was brought up. Ezekiel brought him up a couple times as well.
Shout out.
Yep. And so now we get to see a little bit of like what it was like there in exile, and get a little bit more insight there. So Daniel takes place. He kind of covers a few different kings, his lifespan in his book. Starts with Nebuchadnezzar, goes through his son as well, Belshazzar, and then even goes into the Persian Empire and deals with those kings there as well. So we'll cover that over the rest of this week, but we start here in chapter 1, which, he dates it for us, which is really helpful. In the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah. So before he's taken away and Zedekiah ultimately replaces him, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon comes to Jerusalem and lays siege on him, and he and a group of the royal family of Judah is kind of taken to Babylon. So let's start here in chapter 1. What jumps out to you early as we get this story of ultimately how they end up in Babylon under the care of, or under the watch of Nebuchadnezzar?
Yeah, I mean, they're the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
The first to go.
Yeah.
So you already know something special about these guys here, like Daniel and his 3 friends that went with him. But I think what was interesting was just off the bat that they get taken to Babylon here, right? And in verse 4, it says that they are young men. So I just assume like they are young, right?
Yep.
They're physically fit and good health, right? And this like they were suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perspective, and capable of serving in the king's palace. And they were to be taught the Chaldean language and literature.
Yeah.
And just to think that like you get taken, and I mean at this point he writes the book, or Daniel is written in both Aramaic and in Hebrew. Like he at least knows 2 languages now, right? Like who knows how many more. But it's been thrown in here, like, and just pick up another language and the literature here, right? And I think it was just really interesting. But in all of that, and it was kind of like a rebranding of who they were, because they even got new names, right?
Yep.
So it was like a rebranding of who they were supposed to be. I love that in all of that they remained true. They knew who they were. Yeah. Right? They didn't get caught up in the hype, because I mean, think about it. Like, we about to go serve a king, like a really wealthy king, like he really well off. Like, we could level up if we just play along and just blend in, and just drink this fine wine.
Yeah.
And eat this food. Listen, we can fly under the radar because we got the language down. We getting it. But they were cream of the crop, but they still did not let all of that get to their head and forget the Lord's statutes, which was just noble. No.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good call out. And one of the things that we'll get to that a little bit more in chapter 3, but that is some of the theme, right? If you recall when we were back in Jeremiah 29 really stuck out to me, and we'll refer to Jeremiah later in this book as well, because Daniel is well aware of what Jeremiah wrote. But in Jeremiah 29, one of the things that Jeremiah writes to those exiles is to say, hey, get comfortable, right? Build houses, have babies, get married, ultimately even pursue the well-being of the country that you'll be in and the nation, the land you'll be in. And he tells them to do those things, but he also gives them these instructions essentially for how they should thrive and excel in exile. And I think Daniel really explores what that looks like in practice, what it looked like for people to live in exile, pursue the well-being of where they were,
of the king,
but also not compromise their righteousness and their holiness, like who they were in that regard, right? It really explores that. And I think that's a helpful thing for us to know, because one of the things that as we've been reading through the prophets as a whole, I've been really reflecting on, okay, God, what do you want us to know? In all of this, right? Because obviously these prophecies aren't literal for us today, because we don't live in that time. We don't live in 600 BC, right? To where we're expecting some kingdom to come to conquer us. But there are takeaways and things that we can kind of apply. And I do believe, you've heard me say this, I do believe we live in Babylon.
Yeah.
Right? Here in even America, the country that is, professes to be necessarily a quote unquote founded in Christian principles and one nation under God and those kind of things. In a lot of ways where we live is still Babylon.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, to your point, I love seeing just this unpacked, which we'll get to. And I think the first example that we get of this is in their diet, right? So again, we'll get a couple different examples, but the first one we're introduced to in chapter 1 is the fact that the Babylonians eat differently than the Jews do, right? And now they're in the king's palace, and although they're getting the best food that the land of Babylon has to offer, it conflicts with their diet as far as what is seen as clean and unclean and holy, right? And so what jumped out to you as they kind of had this decision to make? Anything that was particularly insightful to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, as these stories unfold, just the faith that they have in God here. It stuck out to me when they were like, listen, just give us 10 days and then you can examine our appearance. But it's like as if they just knew already, no, we'll be all right. Just give us 10 days and then you will see. Yeah. It wasn't like it was proving it to themselves. It was give us 10 days and then you will see. Pretty much we'll be all right. At the end of the 10 days, the Lord showed up, right? And they looked healthier, they looked better. But I think for me, it was kind of just trusting what God's telling you to do. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't really add up. Other people might be doubting and questioning, but it was just this internal faith that they had that was just no, this is what we're sticking to. Yeah. Regardless of what it looks like, without the fear of looking scrawnier, right? It did not seem like in this text, it did not seem like that was a concern of theirs. So they would look any worse. Yeah. It was more so let me just prove to you who my God is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think I appreciate that because, we ultimately do see, as you said, not just God show up, but God reward them, right? Their faithfulness is ultimately what led to them being elevated to such a place that no one was greater than them kind of in that time, right? like it said, in every matter of wisdom and understanding, the kings consulted them about it. This is verse 20.
Yes.
And he found them 10 times better
Yeah.
than all the magicians and mediums in his entire kingdom. And so, like, I just think that it's interesting that their faithfulness, because I believe it's their faithfulness, not their diet, that made them better. Right. Like, it's their faithfulness to God, and to what he asked of them. And so, yeah, I think to your point, not only did they end up just kind of healthier and whatnot, but they ended up rewarded kind of for their faithfulness too. And so that was interesting. And just before we get to 2, I will say, like, it does remind me, though, going back to our conversation when we were going through kind of the laws about what they could and could not eat. I remember we pointed out that, like, a lot of what God set aside for them was just good, healthy eating, like healthy habits, right? Like, it wasn't when he's like, yeah, only eat these animals and not these animals, right? Or, you know, don't eat the blood, or, you know, like those kind of things, right? Like, he didn't want them eating the stuff that tended to, you know, scavenge and eat other flesh and those kind of things. Like, I thought it was interesting that even then it was like, okay, this seems like these are good eating habits, and healthy habits. And so, you know, to see that once they kind of essentially choose like his diet, and his diet was not necessarily vegetables only, but because their vegetables were, you know, they weren't prepared. I mean, their meats weren't prepared in a way that the Jews would have prepared it. That was obviously the big issue. But still, by, you know, committing to the diet that God had kind of established, they ultimately ended up healthier too.
Yeah.
Like, even if they didn't get blessed with it, the fact that they ended up healthier, I think, just proved that from the beginning, God's way was still better. Like, it wasn't just, I am trying to keep something from you guys and say you can't have it, but essentially it was a better option.
Definitely. And you started at 20 and went to 21 about there being 10 times wiser and better than all the other, which just made me interested in why, as we will look over these next couple of chapters, like, why do the kings consider, like, they still consult these mediums and these magicians and stuff like that. They continue to go back to them and get frustrated. And I'm like, well, right here you just realize that these men were the wisest, right? And they look stronger and they're healthier and better, right? And more fit and had more knowledge and wisdom than everyone else. So I was really confused once it was said here that, like, I kept seeing that the kings would go and gather the other people first, and then they would let them down. And then they'd be like, well, go get Daniel. And I know we haven't gotten into it here, but I'm sure you guys might have read that already. But yeah, like, going into the chapter 2 with these dreams, I just think it's really interesting that they've said it here, but yet they don't act in it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good call out, that it does seem like Daniel tends to be like the last resort. Like, when everybody's going to die, they about to kill all the wise people. It's like Daniel's like, hold up, y'all ain't give me a chance. Like, let me seek the Lord. And I think, like, because definitely a good time to transition to 2, but, like, I think as a practical application for that, we've talked about this before, but it's probably just a good reminder. I think in our lives, like, that same logic can really be applied to, like, why we don't go to God first with so many things, right? Like, we have, you know, the all knowledge and wisdom and available to us, right? Like, literally, you know, he is all knowing and all seeing and all powerful, and he cares for us and all those things. But often we will go to our friends or our mentors or our, you know, whomever. Google. We
have at 2 a.m. on Google.
Right, or AI nowadays, right?
Self-diagnosing.
Like, we go to all those things before we go to the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, and as you said, you talk about stuff like, right, he knows our bodies better than we know our bodies. Like, he knows all of those things. And so, you know, I think that same question could probably be, you know, turned back to me. Right. And not,
you know,
just
I'm guilty.
Yeah.
I'm calling myself out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely applicable. But speaking of that, Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 has this dream, and it's a very interesting way that he approaches it, because essentially, like, this is so different than, like, when we got Pharaoh's dream in Exodus, or in Genesis, or some of the others that have come before, because he's like, I'm not even gonna tell you the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all gotta tell me what I dreamed and then tell me the interpretation.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not even gonna tell you what happened. And so it's this crazy thing that he challenges them, and everybody's like, bro, what you asked me to do is too much. Like, there's no one that can do this. And the Chaldeans, this is like verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king, no one on earth can know what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean, right? So like, it's interesting that he approaches it this way, but he's essentially he's getting ready to kill all of them, all of the wise men, including the Jews. Like Daniel and his friends are getting ready to get swept up in this, and Daniel gets some grace. He gets time. He asks Arioch, like, hey, give me some time to go pray, seek the Lord. Maybe he'll reveal this. And yeah, he does what the Chaldeans believed no man could do, which was essentially tell him the dream and its interpretation. So what jumped out to you here in chapter 2, in this story, we can take the story as a whole. What was significant to you in this?
So the first thing is you read verse 10, but I was going to say verse 11 stuck out to me because it says, what the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Interesting, because our God dwells with us, right? Like they believe that their gods just don't mess with people, right? They're not dwelling with us. They're not talking to us. They're not. But Daniel, God, right? The God of the Jews, he's literally sitting in the temple right now.
Yeah.
Amongst the people, watching them defile his temple.
Yeah.
And
he would go before them, right? In the Ark of the Covenant, even before the temple was created, like he was among his people.
Blow the trumpet, have the priest blow the trumpet, and I will show up for you and fight your battles. He was always dwelling with them and always, leading them and giving them that wisdom. So I think that stuck out to me at first because it was just like, what our God does. And so that jumped out to me. And then, like you said, that he goes, he has this order to kill him. And in verse 16, it says, so Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time. So that he could give the king an interpretation. How brave is it that the king just ordered you to be killed and then you just roll up to the king? Like, you could have been killed on sight.
I mean, you had nothing to lose at that point. Like,
I guess not.
Yeah,
but
either you're gonna be killed later or you could be killed at that moment. So you might as well shoot your shot.
But I'm just saying, there was a brave move.
I don't disagree.
It was a bold move that you was just gonna roll up and just be like, hey.
Yeah.
But that jumped out to me. And then I think one other thing.
Before you go too far, I think right after that, I love how he goes to his friends and they pray about this together.
Come on, prayers.
Come on, prayers. This part blessed me so much that like Daniel didn't just go and seek the Lord on his own and say like, God, show me. But verse 17 says, Daniel went to his house and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We also know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're Babylonian names. Urging them to ask the God of heavens for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the Babylon's wise men. And so, like, he goes to them, he shares this with them, like what's going on, and he essentially asks them to pray with him.
Yeah,
and I just that blessed me so much, man. Like that he didn't just try to take this on his own, and just say like, I got this. I'm gonna figure this out, but like, I need my prayer warriors with me, man. Like, I know my boys is gonna pray. I know they're gonna pray for me and they're gonna pray with me. Yeah. And I know they're gonna pray to the God of the heavens. Right. And so I don't know, just in general, that just blessed me and I think encouraged me, like, like again, I don't have to do this on my own, man. Like seek prayers and partners and that'll be in this with me. So
no, that's really good.
That encouraged me. But yeah, what else were we going to go to?
No, it is. It's good. I like it because he in this prayer he even just acknowledges that the wisdom and the power belongs to God, right? Like there's always this selflessness that comes to it. Even when he rolls up and says it to the king, like, yeah, he said in verse 27, no wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he is asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, very much like Joseph, like you mentioned before in Genesis, where he points back like, oh, no, I can't.
Yeah.
But my God in heaven can. And so, but the thing that I was going to say about even just this whole part right here was, like you said, that we haven't seen this in scripture where somebody's had to tell them what their dream was first. And I think that kind of gives the rest of the book, as I've heard someone say, this is giving the rest of the book its validity, right? That like, if he can tell about the past, the unknown past, like this assures that he's just not just making up stuff in this book, and that he can tell about the future, right? Good. Like it took this special instance in this moment that we can see that he has revealed something, and the people have been able to confirm it, right? The king was able to confirm, oh, you the real deal. Yeah. You know, you the real deal, and you're not over here just making up stuff.
Like this is real revelation from God.
Exactly.
Like, because as you said, he didn't know kind of what it's not a Joseph situation where it's like, I'm gonna tell you the dream and then you interpret. It's like, no, only God could reveal to you what I actually dreamed.
Exactly.
That's good.
Yes.
That's a good point.
It is, right? And because he goes on in this book and has revelations about many things.
Yeah. To come.
Yeah. It's stuff that was coming shortly after his lifespan, but then also things in the end times, right?
Yeah.
Like the span of it is so long. And so I think this moment right here gives us that validity that like, okay, Daniel the real deal.
Yeah.
So I can trust in this book right here.
I like that. Yeah, I think one of the other things while we're in that section, and I know we got to make our way through these other two chapters, but I loved verse 30. Like just in general, man, I'm just always encouraged by just the humility of some of these people. Like I think when you are granted that kind of revelation, it's very easy to prop yourself up, right? And believe that like you are special and chosen by God, you know, kind of thing for something like that. But I love it. He just says, man, like, as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Like, God didn't reveal this to me actually even because of me or for me. Like, he revealed it because he wanted you to know what it meant.
Exactly.
He had something to tell you.
Which is normally the message of the prophet, normally. Repent.
Yeah. Like, he has something for you, and ultimately, like, that's why he revealed it. It's not because of me. Like, I'm not special. I'm not more wise than the next person. Essentially, the biggest difference between him and probably anybody else is he just sought the Lord. Like, like all these other diviners, and you know, they weren't seeking God specifically. So, I don't know. I just love that, and I think it's just a reminder again, just for me in general.
Yes.
To keep in mind that anything that the God reveals to us or shares with us, like, it's not for us. It's usually for someone else, for one.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes it is for us, but again, it's not because of us, right? Like, it's not because we are, you know, anything great. So that was interesting. We get into interpretation briefly here before we kind of go into 3. I mean, ultimately, there's this statue with these different types of metals or stones, whatever you kind of want to use to describe those. And it's meant to talk about the fact that this ultimately talking about the different kingdoms that are coming, like that will not just his, but Persia, who will come later, and some others that will kind of conquer, and then eventually one king that will rule over all of them, you know, by the time it's all said and done, and that king being, you know, who we know to be Jesus at some point. But it kind of talks about that, and then he talks about, you know, again, he gave him the rule over all those things. But anything about the dream itself that you thought was interesting before we kind of get to 3?
I mean, it's just the clay and iron feet of like this divided nations, right? It just got weaker and weaker and weaker. It was like the whole foundation of this statue was just weak, right? And I know it was less about the statues and more so just about the kingdoms and what they represented. But yeah, that was about all. But even at the end of it, I think it's just so interesting in 47 where he's just like, your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries, right? And he promotes Daniel and does all this great stuff. And I love how Daniel looks out for his boys. Okay. Yeah. Verse 49 is but at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. And so he's just like, yeah, nah, I need my boys to be elevated too.
Partners, man. I'm only here because they was praying with me.
Listen, they need to be elevated too.
Absolutely.
But I love that. Well, I think it's interesting that here Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges who God is, but in this time period, although they acknowledge gods, like Yahweh was not acknowledged as the one true God, and that was the problem.
Yeah.
Like that was the big problem that the Jews ran into. Is the big problem here that we see is like, yes, we know and acknowledge Yahweh to be God, but you think that he's one amongst the gods, and God is trying to let you know, I don't stand in line with these.
Yeah.
I am not one of these gods.
Yeah.
There is only one God. That is me. The rest of these is puppets.
Yeah.
That y'all bow down to. And so it is this continuation and this rhetoric of them acknowledging God, but just missing the mark on like, no, he's not one of the gods. He is the God. And so we go to chapter 3. Sorry, I feel like I've been taking your segues into the next chapter. I'm going to chapter 3 though. And he's just like making a statue of himself to bow down to, as if he's one of the gods. And the Lord is like, you are not in my realm.
Yeah.
Homie, no. I made you and everything else. Like,
yeah. No, I mean that's exactly the kind of order of events there that is important, because again, there's that acknowledgement, but there's that immediate just kind of a return.
Definitely.
But in chapter 3, we get a very famous and well-known story, because again, he, as you said, he builds this statue, but he doesn't just build it. He also makes a law that everyone has to bow down to it, essentially. And every time there's a sound of this trumpet, and so or any of these instruments, I should say, a bunch of different instruments. And so you mentioned Daniel's boys who are in the province of Babylon are part of these people that are required to do this. And similar to Daniel and obviously the rest of them earlier, when it came to their diet, they have another choice to make of whether they will compromise kind of who they are, or not even who they are, but what God expects of them, ultimately to please this king, this earthly king. And so, again, we know the story. Ultimately, they choose not to, even with the threat of fire, being thrown into a fiery furnace. That is the threat that will happen. They are thrown into that fiery furnace. And God saves them and spares them.
Yeah.
And again, Nebuchadnezzar sees this and recognizes God as the one true God again. But yeah, what jumps out to you here in chapter 3 in the story?
Well, first it was verse 8. It says, some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. It was like they was just waiting.
Yeah.
Right? Just like we'll see later on with Daniel and the lions den, right? Like they just took this as an opportunity moment. And to me, it was just like when we're following the Lord, people might not like it, right? Like, and that was the because they realize there's some type of favor, right? And whether they don't understand it, they don't like it, whatever. But it's just, some people are just going to take opportunities. But even in still, I love that he does not say, and then the Jews fought them Chaldeans, right? The Jews fought back, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, they did not pick a fight back. Like, they let their God answer for them. And I think that's my takeaway. Is like, yes, let people be upset with me. Our job, especially in the New Testament, our job was to love. And even to love our enemies, right? and then we let the Lord be judge and juror. And so I think in verse 16 this really shows up for me, because these boys are so cold to me. Like, they are just, when I say like elite, like bad boys for me, in my opinion, in verse 16, because he goes in 15, Nebuchadnezzar says, and who is this God?
Who is the God?
Who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Because once again, he has elevated himself to the God level.
Yeah.
And it's like, and not even just elevated himself as a God, but like as a God that can't be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like, yes, the God of gods is essentially what he kind of puts himself on that level of. But yeah.
Exactly, right? And so these boys say, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they replied to the king Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. How bossy is that?
Yeah.
We don't have to answer you, boo.
I will not even dignify that question with a response.
I'm not gonna do it. And it says, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. Like I'm looking at you in your face.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say, my God can.
Yeah.
Point blank in the period, right? And he says, but even if he does not rescue us, listen, we can burn up if we want to.
Yep.
We can be burnt crispy, crisp bacon in 2.2 seconds.
Yeah.
And we'll be just fine with that, because even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. They didn't leave no words out. It's like they didn't flinch.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is just, these are the prayer partners we need.
No, that's real.
Like, and can we be these people for someone else?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so good. I think like, I love, this is one of my favorite chapters in all the Bible. You've probably heard me preach it a couple times, because to your point, man, it's the faith, it's the faithfulness, it's the, like the way I've always just kind of thought is just that, like, it's the faithfulness in the face of fire, man. Like, just like literal fire in front of you. I'm like, half of us, no, 99% of us,
0.9,
you know, like, will never face this kind of actual threat and persecution for the sake of our devotion to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, never.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, especially if we just stay here in this country.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's rare that our life will ever be on the line. And not even just like life, like, I mean, being burned to death and burned alive sounds like the most torturous, worst type of way to pass, right? And so, like, it's the fact that, as you said, they remain faithful. And I appreciate two things about it. Like, I've always appreciated two things. Like, one, like you said, their faith in believing what God could do, as you said, right? Like, eventually, like, if he can do it.
Yeah.
But two, their willingness to just also submit to the sovereignty of God, to say, even if he doesn't, it does not change who he is. And that is, man, that's so hard. Like, that is so hard to accept. Like, to have that kind of faith that says, even if God does not show up for me in this moment, it does not change whether he exists. Like,
or if he's good.
Or who he is, right? Like, it just doesn't change that about him. And I think that it's hard, because we want to believe in a God who will do for us when we want him to.
Make us happy.
Like,
if you love me, you'll make me happy.
Yeah, like,
we do the things I want you to do.
We believe that. We believe it, and we believe our life should be easy, and there shouldn't be trials, and it shouldn't be difficult, and we shouldn't be under attack, and we shouldn't have those. Like, that's what we believe. And they're flat out like, no. Even if we die at your hands, it does not change who God is.
Yes.
And I've always been challenged by that, because there have been seasons, and I won't get in on that here in the podcast, but there have been seasons where I've been really face to face with God. What if you don't do this?
Yes. Yeah. That's what I was thinking about as you was talking.
What if you don't do this? Like, can I still praise you? Can I still love you? Can I still believe you are who you say that you are?
Can I pray and fast like Daniel and his friends did, not get a response, and then still show up committed to you.
Yeah.
And praising you and knowing that you are good and knowing that even your silence was good.
Yeah.
And then even what I endured during your silence was still good. And for some way, in some shape or form, like James says, is for my maturation.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, I won't re-preach it here because we got to get through 4 here. But like, yeah, I love this passage so much, and I think it is a real challenge. Again, about you want to know how to excel in exile. Like, there are lines you can't cross. And last thing I'll say on this, and I might have mentioned this previously, but like I've always been struck by the fact that they're the only 3.
Yes.
We know they aren't the only 3 Jews that came to Babylon. They're not the only 3 Jews that are a part of this group or whatever the case may be, right? There are more. The only ones to get thrown in the fire, though.
Yeah. They had their heads bobbing. The rest of them was like, amen.
Amen. Yeah. And,
to the God of Babylon. Amen.
Right. And they probably made a choice like, hey, it's going to take me 30 seconds to bow, and I'm going to be right back with God.
I have my little Baptist finger up.
And I'm going to be right back.
I'm about the Baptist finger up. My
so,
head bobbing.
yeah, just, it's so challenging, but they're saved, they're delivered. There's an additional person in the fire that is always believed to have been Jesus present here.
I think it's interesting in verse 25, like, how do you know what the son of gods look like? He says he looks like the fourth looks like a son of the gods. It doesn't say he looks like another god.
Yeah.
Like, how y'all know what the son of the gods look like?
Yeah.
Interesting to me.
Yeah, but
out there.
But yeah, he makes this decree essentially that nobody can say anything against, offensive against this God. And you would think Nebuchadnezzar would be saved, but chapter 4 tells us that that's not the case, because he has another dream. This time, the dream essentially tells him, talks about this tree, and it gets torn down essentially to its, not just its roots, but its stump. And yeah, Daniel interprets the dream for him. Before we get it, I was searching here because it reminds me a lot of
Assyria.
Yeah, Assyria, which Ezekiel refers to in chapter 31.
Go and get it.
Right. And so yeah, he says the same thing about this tree as well. That the birds in the sky nested in its branches, all the animals in the field give birth beneath its boughs. This is verse 6 of 31, right? And he just kind of talks about this same tree. And so I did think it was very interesting that it's like this almost the same imagery, like the same, like I said, the same dream essentially given to Ezekiel, which happens a little bit later, than what Daniel gets here as well. And that God is like literally giving, I don't know, it's just so crazy to me to just think of God giving people the same vision separately, like in different places towards these different kings. But yeah, what jumped out to you here in chapter 4?
I think that's what jumped out to me in chapter 4.
Okay.
Took my bad. But no, it was that we have this sovereign God that, like, that's in it. I've mentioned it multiple times on this podcast so far, is what I do love about the Bible. It's just its continuity, and just like how you can just have one author over here writing in one language and another author over here decades later writing in another language, and then what they're writing is the same. Right? Like, and it parallels, and the verbiage is similar, but it's not all the way quite similar because it's embodied in books that you can tell is a different writer, right? And so that's what jumped out at first. But yes, this tree. But then the other thing that jumped out to me was just like interpretation of the dream, right? That like when he says, listen, now go get Belshazzar, right? Because none of these wise men in my kingdom can make the interpretation known to me. This is in verse 18.
Yeah.
Once again, he has gone to other people first. Yeah. And now Daniel needs to clean up the mess. But Daniel comes and he's stunned by it. But he's just like, yo, you're about to be eating grass and living with these wild beasts. And I see that the Lord is continuously trying to humble him and giving him opportunities.
Yeah.
And
he gave him chances for sure.
Chance after chance after chance. And he continues to go back because the next, was it? At the end of 12 months?
Yeah, it's 28, 29, yeah.
Yeah, verse 29, a year later, he is on this rooftop talking about, verse 30. Is this not Babylon the Great that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?
Yeah.
And the Lord, I feel like in that moment, it's like enough's enough. Go and eat some grass.
Yeah. No, that was good. I did think I thought it was funny that Daniel was just kind of like, yo, I actually really hope this dream is not for you. Like, may this be for your enemies, not for you, because like legit, this is bad.
This is bad.
This is bad. But
this is. I mean, I could just see him like listening, like, oh yeah, I'm not trying to tell the king this.
Right. Yeah, but there's some boldness, man. You tell the people what they need to hear. Like,
that's what.
Yeah, like
you tell the people what the Lord done said, not what they want to hear.
Absolutely. It is required.
That's the prophet.
Yeah.
Being a prophet.
Yeah. So
come on.
Like I said, I thought it was interesting. And then, he does ultimately does eventually repent, right? And kind of come back and acknowledge. This is verse 34. I thought it was interesting that it switches to like Nebuchadnezzar as the narrator essentially at this piece. And he kind of gives praise to God and whatnot after he ultimately repents. But yeah, man, it goes back to like the big thing, his issue, and ultimately one of the consistent themes we've seen with God is like that pride, that elevating yourself, taking credit for what God has done, essentially, and that doing that will always put you in the wrong place with God, right? Like anytime you kind of try to not even just take his place, but take his glory specifically, right? What was supposed to be for his.
Because the ironic thing is that our God has been speaking to Ezekiel and Jeremiah. He's been speaking to these other prophets saying that, hey, I'm about to use King Nebuchadnezzar as my pawn, right? I'm going to allow him to take you over. I'm going to use him to bring judgment against my people because my people have wronged me. Not because of King Nebuchadnezzar being great in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Right? Not because he's better. But then for God to like use him for these different things, and for Nebuchadnezzar to think that like, oh yeah, I did this on my own. And then for God to give him warning after warning, no, I'm Yahweh. I'm the God. I'm the Lord of Lords, right? And then it'd be like, oh, yeah, but I did this myself, though.
Yeah.
It's just a slap in the face.
Yeah. Yep. We will see that continue on with his son tomorrow when we pick up on chapter 5 and a similar theme there. But great introduction to Daniel. There's a lot here, a lot of narrative, which we haven't had in quite some time, and so definitely a different way to approach it. But again, pray this is helpful as you read it. It gives you some applications, some things that you can take away. Again, encourage you, if you have thoughts, feedback, offer those to us in a chat or however you can kind of reach out and contact us. But appreciate you joining us today for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we pick up on chapter 5. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the Vibes Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.